Hi. Welcome for those of you who are just joining us to the South Texas College of Law Houston. My name is Kate Vickery. I'm the Executive Director of the Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative, which is really proud to be working with the Texas Tribune to present this film screening and panel event this evening. And I want to start just by saying welcome and thank you for being here. I want to do a couple of thank yous, and one particular thank you. Edel Howland has been really helpful. She's with Houston Public Media, and she is over here in this lovely purple dress. Houston Public Media has been helping us kind of with this event and supporting this event here locally, and Edel is happy to talk with you during afterwards if anybody wants to talk with her. I am going to introduce Jay Root, who's going to kind of set up the film, and then following the film, which will be about 30 minutes long, we'll have our panelists come up, and Jay will be facilitating a panel discussion with them to kind of reflect on the film and also some other issues and questions that you have. So Jay is a reporter with the Texas Tribune, and he's a co-producer of this film. And he primarily covers politics and the legislature, so you can ask him lots of questions about this session, and I'm sure they're about to start working again. And I think with that, I'm going to invite Jay to come up here and set up the film, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Welcome. So this film is called Beyond the Wall, and it was truly a product of the efforts of our entire newsroom. The way this got started was in 2015, right around this time of year, I became a full-time investigative reporter, and my editor, Emily Ramshaw, said, come up with some idea that the investigative team, we had a team that was being formed, could work on. And so I was kind of racking my brain. And then, one night I'm watching TV and I see Donald Trump run for president, and he puts immigrants in his crosshairs. And I was thinking, that's it, the border security. So we started a project called Bordering on Insecurity that started in June, July of 2015. And for the next 18 months, we focused on all different aspects of the border, and every step of the way, and Julian will attest to this, I kept telling everybody, get video, get audio, get pictures, and we used a whole bunch of different devices to make this. So I hope you like it, and we'll talk about it when it's over. So I think we're ready to hit play. Go ahead and introduce the members of the panel. Julian Aguilar is my partner in crime at the Texas Tribune, and helped us put this movie together and shot some of the footage and went on all or most of the trips. He is the child of Mexican immigrants. He's an El Paso native, and he's an expert on SB 4, which is the recent Sanctuary Cities bill that passed the legislature. Also knows a lot about cartels, immigration, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Rolling Stones, not necessarily in that order. Sarah Howell is the school social worker at Las Americas Newcomer School in HISD. She has built her career working with immigrants and refugees and specializes in trauma and torture survivors within those populations. She's a graduate of Texas A&M University and has a master's in social work from the University of Houston. Sarah has been to Central America multiple times to visit the countries that unaccompanied minors are currently immigrating from. Stan Merrick is CEO of the Merrick family of companies and co-founder of Texans for Sensible Immigration Policy. He's a Texas native, graduate of Texas A&M University, so he's a homegrown Aggie. He has served in leadership positions in major construction industry organizations and is a member of the boards of the University of St. Thomas, Catholic Charities, and neighborhood centers. Carla Quetzali Perez Ramirez is a third-year law student at the University of Houston Law Center. She also got her undergraduate degree at U of H. She has worked on immigration issues throughout her college career by becoming an intern at the Law Center's Immigration Clinic, organizing deferred action for childhood arrivals clinics on campus, and mentoring undocumented youth in Houston. Carla was born in Mexico City and immigrated to Houston with her parents when she was 2 years old. So before we get started, I would like to give you a little update on Kenny Carias and his family. They were the family that got kicked out of the motel in the middle of the night in Piedras Negras, and the last time we talked to him was shortly before Christmas. About 2 weeks ago, about a month ago, I heard from Kenny, and he said they were going to try to cross in Tijuana, and they decided not to at that moment, but then they decided to split up, and Kenny and his oldest son, who's about 3, crossed in Tijuana. He's now, and they're in detention. Last I heard, he was in Pennsylvania. It sounds like he may get out in about a week. And after he gets out, then his wife, Karina Romero, is going to try to cross with their younger son. So I do have that little update for you. Another big update is Donald Trump got elected president after we made this documentary. And that's where I want to start with this, because the whole idea, as I said, for this film really came from his presidential campaign and the fact that he made immigration such a big deal. And I think that whatever you think about Trump, there has been a pretty significant crackdown under his administration, and it's had a huge drop. We've seen a huge drop in apprehensions. So my question is, does that not show that the Obama era policies, as many critics said, drew more people here? Sarah, why don't we start with you on that one? So the question basically is, did the Obama era policies, were they generous, much more generous, and that was one of the reasons why people came? Because we heard a lot of discussion about the fact that people are going to come anyway, and whatever message you send, it doesn't really matter. So, this Trump thing seems to be working in terms of discouraging people from trying to cross, is what I would. So what is you're on the ground, what are you seeing on the ground?
I spoke with a family yesterday that said they're collecting money to bring the next 2 over. I know that arrivals have slowed a little bit, and I know we've been looking at arrivals for our next school year, but from what I'm hearing, the reality on the ground there isn't any different. And so I think it's re-strategizing and thinking about collecting more money for passage. Last time I was in in March, when I was in Guatemala, they were talking about, you get 3 tries now for your price to make it up here. I think unless policies there really change, then people aren't going to stop making the trip, because the story I consistently hear is, I'm definitely going to be killed in my home country, and I might survive here. And I have a chance here, but I might survive. And when that's your reality, I don't think I think the violence has just increased. I think the violence consistently increases. And I hear over and over, day in and day out, that no, I can't move to another city. No, I can't move to, my colleagues have asked, my friends have asked, well, what if they just go to Roatan? What if they just go to Mexico City? And it's just not an option. So it's pervasive and follows them. And so I don't know how much is Obama's policies versus the reality on the ground there.
What do you think the reason is for with the drop in apprehensions?
I think it's re-strategizing and figuring out how best to. I think it's a planning period personally, and trying to figure out the best way to make the trip. I know from when I started the plan, I met a lot of kids who hadn't ever been apprehended to the last 2 years. In 2014, I saw about half of the kids I encountered didn't have A numbers, hadn't gone through immigration. And the 2 years after that, it became safer to identify and go across the border. They would talk about just with their hands up, saying, I'm an immigrant, I can't return home, or I'm seeking asylum. And I think that my personal guess is that they're kind of trying to figure out what the best approach is now. But hearing families talking to kids that don't regret coming, it's hard, it's scary trying to figure out a new life here, but they know that if they return, I hear over and over, if I return, I'm gonna be killed. So I'd still rather fight it out here. It hasn't changed at home.
Okay, allow me to welcome Art Acevedo. the police chief here in Houston. We, of course, at the Tribune know him as the former and longtime Austin police chief, a role he served in from 2007 to 2016. He was born in Cuba, migrated to the U.S. With his family in 1968. He grew up in California and earned his Bachelor of Science degree. That's BS, right? No? In public in public administration from the University of Laverne in California. So we're on our first question, Chief, and the first question is about apprehensions dropping. And my question is, does that not mean that, you know, there was a lot of talk before Trump took the reins that the Obama era policies were attracting people here, and so we're trying to understand what message has been received. You work a lot with immigrant communities. Are you hearing that people are not coming because they're afraid they're going to get deported, not coming because of the Trump presence? What are you hearing?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks all for being here. I think from my perspective, I've been working with immigrant communities my entire career. I started in 1986 as a California Highway Patrol officer, and my dream was to go to East LA because it's the most diverse, probably most densely populated community in California. And so I've been working these issues for many years. I think two things. First of all, President Obama was, he was called by the deporter-in-chief by a lot of folks. So it's a misnomer to believe that he was not tough on immigration. He actually was. He enforced the law. We at the Major City Chiefs Association, I'm the first vice president and the Homeland Security chair, really urged him to change secure communities and to replace it with the priority enforcement program, because we understood as police officers that we want to go after the worst of the worst. And so what happened is the deportations went down. I think from my perspective, what's happening in this country right now, there's the rhetoric is so mean-spirited that a lot of people are just afraid to come here right now. People they're going back into the shadows. They're not coming across the border. And if I had one wish, I wish that all illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants would disappear overnight and then be gone for about 6 months. That's all we need for us to realize the economic impact that these people have on this nation. We would crash and burn economically, and so I think it's really the ugliness of the entire debate that has people staying home, and they don't feel like they can turn to law enforcement. It is an extreme battle, and so it's a perfect storm. And if you think about what's happening with the birth rate, not only do we need immigrants, we're going to have to compete for immigrants in the next 10 to 15, 20 years in order to be a world power. And only people that don't understand that are people that aren't well-read and aren't paying attention to what's happening in the world.
And we're going to get into that policing issue here shortly, but Julian, let me ask you to go ahead and address that same issue about what are you hearing of why apprehensions are down?
Well, I mean, from even when we took the trip, and obviously we spoke to hundreds of folks down there that were trying to get to the United States, and even before that, when going down to McAllen and speaking with Catholic Charities and Sister Norma and the folks that were doing really good work there. It's a small sample population, so they don't speak for everybody, but it seemed kind of like a mixed bag. They said, yeah, I did hear some sort of information that I might be able to, if I arrive with my kid, I could get some sort of permission. Where other people, like Ms. Howe said, they didn't care what was going on in the United States. They just needed to leave. And in some cases, we saw people that, we spoke to some folks in San Salvador who was threatened on his way home and couldn't even go to his house to pack, and just literally left with whatever this gentleman was wearing on his back, and called from the road and said, okay, I'm going to make it to the U.S. or I'm going to try to, anyhow. So I think it is mixed. I think what the Obama administration said about the coyotes, having their own sort of propaganda campaign, saying, if you get to the United States, you're going to have this. I don't think that that's untrue, but I do think that certain politicians sort of overplayed that to criticize the Obama administration. But what I definitely don't think is true is at the state level, when state lawmakers said, certain policies that the state has, like the in-state tuition rate for undocumented immigrants, that's luring people over here. I mean, an 8-year-old kid on top of a train, it's risking his life, isn't really concerned about, what a summer's coursework at UT costs. You know, he's just trying to save his skin. So it was just a lot of information. You know, myriad opinions on this issue, but it's a really nuanced and mixed bag. But my gut would tell me that the majority of the people that were leaving were just leaving so they didn't end up in a cardboard box with Dr. in El Salvador at the morgue.
Stan, what are you seeing out there in terms of the drop in apprehensions and since Trump got elected, how it's affected your world and the immigrant world?
Well, I think that people are very concerned about the stepped up enforcement. And I've had contact with several people that have just gone back to Mexico. They were here illegally. They didn't want to get picked up and deported and have that on their record. Maybe they've got legal family in the United States, and their hope is they can go back to Mexico. We'll have some sort of an immigration solution in the next 2 or 3 years, and they'll apply and come back and be legal with their family. If you don't have a driver's license, it's scary to travel. And you're sort of being held captive in the city you're in. You can't go where there's better jobs. You can't go where there's less enforcement, so you're just sort of here. But remember, Houston, estimates are 400,000 to 600,000 undocumented in our city. Reliant Arena holds 50,000. Think about that. Fill that 12 times. And that's how many people you're looking at in just Houston, 2.5 million in Texas. So it's a big pool, but people are scared. And what distresses me are the children of undocumented parents. They're really having a tough time in school, and we're going to be paying for that socially for a long, long time.
Carla, what's your perspective on this?
Certainly, well, I think as the film alluded to, it talked a little bit about the southern border plan. And so I think that's something to consider in terms of during President Obama's presidency, the U.S. government starting to work with Mexico and perhaps more immigrants being deterred from entering the United States before they even had the chance to get to the United States by being apprehended in Mexico. That said, you know, as an undocumented immigrant myself, this is certainly a very scary time that we are living in, but at the same time, a lot of members of our community are tapping into this really well of resilience that we have because despite, I think, what people may believe about people like myself, we have defied the odds, and I saw the family in the documentary and very much identified with that family. That was my experience, you know, about 20 years ago in terms of coming to this country to be able to live safely and have a place to really thrive with my parents.
So I want to move to the issue of SB4. This was major legislation that addressed immigration in the Texas legislature, and something that we haven't seen. It had previously been blocked over and over. Well, it got through this year. Julian, you covered this issue every step of the way, so can you just walk us through what happened during the legislative process, how this bill got passed, and where it stands right now in terms of court action?
Yeah, sure. So Senate Bill 4, it's called the Anti-Sanctuary Cities Bill, or it's called the Arizona Copycat Bill. It's called the Papers, Please Bill, and it really upset probably 95% of the law enforcement officials, the major police chiefs. The gentleman to my right, obviously, right away started shaking his head as soon as SB4 was mentioned. So that goes to tell you how sort of divisive this issue is. But it's Senate Bill 4 by Republican Senator Charles Perry from Lubbock, and the leading up to the process, Governor Abbott, it was a no-brainer that he was going to make this an emergency item or make this a priority item. And what sort of led up to it was his understanding that Sheriff Sally Hernandez in Travis County was not going to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and not honor ICE detainers, which ICE detainers are a whole separate sort of controversial issue in their own right, whether they're mandatory or not. But Governor Abbott, I think from his time as Attorney General to now Governor, he's moved even further to the right, and this is something that he promised to pass. So the genesis of it was legislation filed in the Senate. In the Senate, it moved there first. It moved through committee. It was a 16-hour hearing in the Senate chamber of the State Affairs Committee. It went to the Senate floor, and it was expected that it was going to be a very extreme version of what the Republicans wanted. The way it came out of the Senate was that police chiefs, sheriffs, elected officials, say on city council or mayors, that enacted a policy that prohibited law enforcement from, generally speaking, enforcing immigration laws. Basically, not asking for people's status or not complying with ICE detainers. They would be subject to criminal penalties. And there was a lot of debate about whether it should be just the detainer language, which, a Texas Tribune analysis saw that, from viewing 16 months of data, that fewer than 1% of the detainers in Texas that were not honored, and even a subset of those were because ICE mislabeled something, or because a person was transferred, say, from Webb County to Harris County, and it just got labeled as noncompliance. But the Senate, as expected, sort of, marked it up, and it was, as before, on steroids, where police chiefs were prevented from telling their officers, you cannot ask about immigration status. And when it went over to the House, the State Affairs Committee there, they removed that language, and they said, they actually made it to where it was mainly the enforcement component, the detainer component, and they could only ask status if a person was arrested, Chairman Guerin, Charlie Guerin, who's a Republican from Fort Worth. And they actually had even considered the fact that they were only going to ask status if you were arrested for a Class A misdemeanor or higher state J felony, so it wouldn't apply to, say, jaywalking or traffic tickets. What happened on the House floor was that the so-called Schaefer Amendment by a Republican lawmaker from Tyler, Matt Schaefer, the Senate language was put back on there, and it led to, I don't know how many of political junkies there are that actually watch the live stream or go to the Senate gallery, but it was an amazing debate once that amendment got put on. People were crying at the back mic, Hispanic lawmakers begging members not to vote for it. Even Chairman Guerin and Chairman Cook, who was the successful veteran lawmaker that ran against Mr. McNutt, even he said, he went out on a limb and said, don't vote for this. This is nobody wants this. But the pressure of politics in a primary, it ended up getting tacked on to the House version, and so it went back to the Senate. And there was maybe for a week and a half, the Senate, people were wondering, like, is the Senate going to stay with the House version, or are they going to take it back to remove the questioning, the papers please, when cops are detaining people, not only as opposed to arresting people. And the Senate, why would they, right? So they kept that extreme language. That led to protests, that led to sit-ins and by protesters at various state offices. The governor signed it, and when people say it was a really unorthodox fashion, usually you have an announcement and you invite the press to your press conference room, and you have the author and the sponsor, and it's a big to-do. But what the governor did on this at 6:30 on a Sunday evening, when a lot of people were either going to church or barbecues, it was May 7th, and I have to note it was also in the middle of the Rockets-Spurs playoff game, which obviously distracted from a lot of people wondering what the political atmosphere was that day. He took to Facebook Live and he signed it. And this led to immediate protests that very same night. May 29th, the last day of the legislature, I'm sure you all know by now that close to 1,000, if not more, protesters, opponents of SB 4 flooded the Capitol. And it led to a shoving match between lawmakers on the House floor that's now made the rounds, from not just Texas and the rest of the country, but around the world. So, this just kind of sort of speaks to how divisive this issue is. Yesterday, the American Immigration Lawyers Association announced that they're pulling out of their convention out of Grapevine, Texas, because of this bill. That's a 15,000 member organization. They expected about 3,000 people to go. So it's a net loss in the millions for the convention business there. There was some pressure to have South by Southwest move from Austin, which wouldn't stand a snowball's chance in hell, regardless of any legislation, but at least the effort was made. So, and I think these things are going to continue to see. There are current lawsuits. There are several, and I think they were consolidated, and the ACLU and the small town of El Cenizo actually are named as the lead plaintiffs on this lawsuit now. And they had asked for a federal district judge to declare this unconstitutional immediately, and there's a court date set for later this month. So that's where we are now. The Texas Commission on Law Enforcement is already sort of starting to get together and try to craft sort of memos and distribute them to the police departments. Obviously, I'm not the expert on that, but the chief is. But I think, and I'll segue to the chief. Chief, when you and I spoke about this last for a couple weeks ago, you said that your hope was that once your men and women on the ground saw how risky it was to become immigration agents, even if they wanted to, they were going to be like, well, you know what, this was all a good idea, but I'm going to go fight crime. So do you think that's still your hope?
Yeah, police officers are smarter than the public give them credit for, and yeah, we are, you know, regardless of what Hollywood says. I'm convinced that most police officers are honorable men and women that have a singular focus, and that's on public safety. And despite their own personal views on issues, I mean, my views, people call me political. Well, I only weigh in on matters of public safety. I think it's a moral obligation. And if you're not willing to put yourself at risk, you don't belong in the chief seat, chair at the fourth largest state in the country. But I'm not naive. I know there will be what I call the children of the corn, right? That every organization has them. They hate the world, they hate their wives, they hate everybody. Hit their cats in the morning probably. You gotta, unfortunately, there's going to be an officer somewhere in the state of Texas that's going to decide to go harass day laborers, it's going to harass people based on the color of their skin or their name or their accent or their ability to speak the English language. So we have to have policies that deal with those outliers, right? And the problem is that despite the fact that I know that, the immigrant community is so fearful that they're not coming forward. And but here's what we're doing. I'm going to make sure, first of all, I'm making sure that our people understand even the law says we can't racially profile. The Constitution does not permit it. So we're going to start with what is the constitutional requirements that our officers have. Two, we're going to make sure that when they do, those outliers decide to ask somebody, especially at the point of detention, because quite frankly, if you're arrested, for the activists out there, once you're arrested, we have an obligation under a lot of treaties to notify consulates and embassies when one of their foreign nationals is arrested. So whether we like it or not, we have that duty. So we do ask that question when somebody's arrested. But we're going to make them write a report documenting and detailing what was it about this individual that they felt that they based the need to ask a question about immigration status for several reasons. Number one, if we don't measure when we're doing it, then we can never push back when some activists will want that want to create fear. It seems like they want to create fear because it gives them more value. I don't know what it is, but so when they say that we're going out here racially profiling large numbers, I want to be able to collect the data to show that whether we are or not. Two, if an officer gets sued for racial profiling or unlawful arrest, I want to be able to protect the taxpayer and the officer if they're acting honorably under appropriate circumstances. And three, I want to discourage police officers from going on fishing expeditions that's going to get them in trouble. Now, here's what really angers me, to be quite frank with you. We worked really hard with Chairman Guerin, who actually came up with a pretty pragmatic language, and and Chairman Cook, we work very closely together on issues in the State Affairs Committee. He's worked with me over the years. These guys get it, right? They get it, that you're not going to get rid of these people, and if you did, the economy would collapse. And quite frankly, for people that may be in the audience that think this is a good idea, we are all being played by politicians that only care about the next primary election, period. We're being played. If they cared about If this was about safety and this was about immigration, first of all, it was about safety. They listened to the subject matter experts, which are police chiefs and labor. Sometimes I don't agree on the day of the week when it comes to police unions, right? They don't understand that that they're the tail and the police department, the police chief are the dog, and they don't get to wag us, even though they try. They don't get that. Well, when you have police leaders and labor speaking out against something, you know that that's a pretty darn bad policy. So we know it's not about public safety. And we know it's not about immigration because we're not going to go out and make thousands of arrests. It's all about party politics and extreme politics and the next, primary election. And it's about the fact that we as Americans aren't voting. If we all voted instead of complaining about everything, this stuff would end. If they want to get rid of illegal immigration, they would make it that if you at the Tribune hire, if we catch you with an illegal undocumented immigrant, the first time you lose your business license for 1 week. The next time you lose your business license for a month. The next time it's for a quarter. What happens to the jobs? But that's not what it's about. We're being played, and I think that we need more leaders to speak out against these
Chief,
bad
you
policies.
talked about outliers, and I remember sitting in Chairman Cook's committee. I think it was in 2011 when this came up, and they had law enforcement that testified, and they talked about the fact that under this bill, and under the sort of aspect where you actually empower police officers below their chain of command to basically, you can't have a policy, you can't tell them what to do, that you could sort of encourage this a rogue cop and allow them to say, look, the law allows me to do this. To what extent does the text of this bill allow that to happen right now?
Well, it depends how smart the police chief is, to be honest with you. Hey, have at it. You can go ask this. I can't stop you from asking the question. But this is the city of Houston. We're down to 5,100 police officers, despite the fact we're the fourth largest, fastest growing big city in the country. You compare us to Chicago, they're only a couple 100,000, 300,000 more than us in population, much smaller in geography. They have almost 13,000 police officers. I'm down to 5,100. If I get a cop that I find out when calls for service are stacked up, they're going to the Home Depot harassing day laborers, their priorities are not where they need to be, and we will deal with it. Because the legislature is not going to run the Houston Police Department as long as I'm the police chief. I'm responsible to the people of the city, not them. And then, and quite frankly, I get to manage my resources. They're trying to criminalize leadership in this state. And I'm not, you know what, be honest with you, I'm not here to keep my job, I'm here to do my job. And if anybody knows me, I like to fight. So my wife always says, you're not happy unless you're in a fight. And she goes, you're right, as long as it's not with you. But we can still manage the workflow. And you remember in 2011, I testified. I was a captain in East LA, and then it turned out to somebody else. I had a guy named Otto. I won't tell his last name, but you'd call his house, and it was very interesting. His tape recorder was like you were calling like the Third Reich or something. Very interesting character. Well, one day he decided, I'm going to start hanging out. Anybody from East LA or know anything about East LA? There's a place called Leg Lake Park that people that would go there to fish without a license, right? They weren't fishing. It wasn't catch and release. It was catch and eat. And these fish, I wouldn't eat them if you paid me to eat them, if you know what I'm saying. These were hungry people. Well, this guy decided instead of dealing with the gangbangers and the drug dealers and the drive-by shootings and the smuggling, the human trafficking and trafficking, I'm going to go write tickets to people at Leg Lake at $500 a pop. And this is back in 2000. So you know what I did? I called him in and I explained to him, you're a member of the California Highway Patrol. Here are the issues important to us. If you want to go write tickets for this, then you need to join Fish and Game. Okay, you're in the wrong department. And I'm telling you right now that I cannot stop people by law from asking that question. But I can control their priorities, and I can control their workload, and I can control where they need to be. Our dispatchers would be dispatching people, and again, if we find people that are off doing something else, when you're calling 911, let me ask you all this. When you call 911 with a home invasion robbery and you're hiding in your closet, where do you want your Houston police officer to be? Booking an undocumented immigrant that, but for their immigration status, are okay in our community? Because if there are MS-13, if they're drug dealers, or they're rapists, or they're bad hombres, guess what? We're already coming after them already. So the only thing that's left are the cooks, the nannies, the gardeners, the people that, but for their immigration status, are actually law-abiding and productive members of society. Where do you want my cops to be? Responding to your house to get there within an average of 7 minutes, or booking somebody for nothing other than their immigration status?
I want to ask a question of Stan Merrick. Stan, in 2011, that Sanctuary Cities bill was sank because business interests, your people, construction industry, the late Bob Perry and Charles Butt of HEB killed that bill. And I have been around long enough to remember when a former governor named George W. Bush said that family values don't stop at the border, and there was a very pro-business attitude in the legislature, to a lot of consternation of liberals. But what happened? What happened to that business coalition? They got their heads handed to them this year.
This has been going on so long, and people are so tired of immigration. I mean, even my own kids, I come home at night, they say, "Dad, don't talk about immigration tonight, please." And the GHP, the Greater Houston Partnership, did come out against it. Of course, we had to fight the bathroom bill. There were too many battles going on. And I think Patrick and Abbott were just dead centered, zeroed in, they were going to get it passed. I don't even want to comment on it. It angers me. So I don't, but businesses, on the whole immigration issue, I'm extremely disappointed in the business community to this point. I do think we're going to be seeing some real leadership from the Greater Houston Partnership over the coming months, because the partnership has finally realized this thing is a business issue. We are not going to be able to attract companies to Texas if we don't have labor. And the more people we deport, the fewer workers we've got. You know, the border's secure. There's more people going across than coming in. And in some trades like mine, it's real hard to get these kids out of high school into the trades. And we can talk more about that later.
Carla, let me ask you, you know, the immigration activist community obviously took it on the chin in the legislature this session as well. But we saw a lot of energy in the gallery. We saw a lot of protest. The question a lot of people have is, what do you do with that? Is that going to translate into votes? Is that going to translate into change? Or will it be like, for example, in 2014, or when at in the 2013 legislative session, after Wendy Davis had her filibuster and Planned Parenthood got all upset, but it ended up not translating into votes. So how do you see the activism translating into political action?
Yeah, so I mean, we definitely took it very hard this legislative session, all around issues with Senate Bill 4 and the trans oppression bill as well. And what we really saw, and I think everybody saw on May 29th, my organization, United We Dream, had been working to pull in people from all across the state to come into the Capitol. And there's a lot of energy right now as people are going back to their cities locally. We were in Austin every single month. I was probably in Austin at least once or twice a month. And the work doesn't end in Austin, and something that I have heard is, in particular from local leadership, is what happened in the legislature is the legislature's fault, but now we look locally. And so I can speak to what we're doing here in Houston to try to really protect our people and to make sure that people are not having this feeling of being unsafe, of being fearful of not being able to live freely and being able to thrive with their families. And I mean, just today at work, there was a woman on the phone, and she talked about how she's very worried about Senate Bill 4. She didn't say Senate Bill 4, but she was like, yeah, come September, I just want to make sure that my kids are going to be fine here. I need to find out how to get them passports because we may have to leave. And so we want our community right now to feel empowered all over Texas, not just every time that we come to the Capitol. And we have seen a lot of good energy around, and I think the day of the May 29th action at the Capitol, as everybody may have heard, Representative Rinaldi called ICE on us. And for me, obviously that's very personal. That was the first time that I brought my mom to the Capitol with me. And I know a lot of us felt that way. That day was a community event. That day was for the community to feel that the Capitol was theirs, and that it can continue to be that way. And so actions like what this representative did will certainly have repercussions come the 2018 elections. And just to put it simply, with Senate Bill 4 is a racist, unjust law. I don't like seeing it through the lens of just having to do with papers or sanctuary cities. There are no such thing really as sanctuary cities. This is a racial profiling law that will affect brown and black Texans disproportionately, and I think there is a lot of energy right now across Texas within communities of color, people of conscience, who are doing everything they can to make sure that we either don't see this through September 1st, or if it does happen, that locally we are doing what we can to be protected.
So I think what has motivated a lot of these bills, at least on the surface, is people are talking about immigrants who commit crimes here. And we know, we've seen the studies that suggest that, if anything, undocumented immigrants are committing crimes at a lower rate. However, we do know that there are some undocumented immigrants, just like U.S. citizens, who commit crimes, sometimes horrible crimes. So let me start with you, Sarah. What should the state and local law enforcement do when they come into contact with people who have committed crimes and who are here without legal status? What should the policy be?
Good question. I'm ready to talk about trauma. I'm ready to talk about schools. I'm ready to talk. Oh my goodness. Can you ask me one more?
That's not a very nice
Well, you
question.
want to take a crack at that? Chief?
They need to do their time here for the crime, and then they need to be deported.
Yeah.
It's people. Look, common sense and good judgment goes a long way in life. We need to focus on criminals, and if they're criminals, and they're hardened criminals, and they're violent criminals, we need to hold them accountable. Some people want to deport them, let them do jail time somewhere else. I don't, because what will happen is those countries, they might let them out in about 3 months, and they'll try to come back. If it's something they did that were they supposed to do 20 years, let's put them in prison for 20 years and then deport them. That's
so what should our policy be at the border then? Like, if you could wave a magic wand, Chief, and figure out what border security is at the border, how do you weed through the people who have a legitimate asylum claim, a lot of people who are maybe looking for a day labor gig, and then an MS-13 gangbanger? That's a hard job, right?
Well, most of your MS-13 gang members are, especially with biometrics starting to get better, and DNA, and all the facial recognition. Technology is going to get to the point where when we detain people, Big Brother, we will know who they are. And for me, what we need to do is enact comprehensive immigration reform once and for all, period. We've been kicking the can down the street. Our numbers are let's face it, this is about brown people. This isn't about Irish immigrants. This is not about Italians. This isn't about Europeans. It's not about Canadians. It's about brown people. Notice that there's this, one of our top trading partners in Mexico, by the way. I mean, the economic impact of our partnership with Mexico is, it's very significant. We need to have several things. Number one, we do need to secure the border, which, you ain't gonna do with the wall, okay? Because what they're going to do, people are going to go under the wall, over the wall, through the wall, around the wall, but the wall is not going to stop anybody that wants to come through. You use technology, right? And you use aerial assets. There's a way to secure the border. Number two, we need to have a robust guest worker enforcement, guest worker program in this country. A lot of people would love to come for 2 years at a time, then leave for 6 months. I'll never forget, in California at a Lincoln Republican Club, some lady goes, and I was saying, and I was speaking that on balance, that immigrants have a tremendously positive impact on our economy. And this lady goes to me, well, you just said that. I go, well, how are they helping our economy? They send all the money down to Mexico. And I looked at her and I said, lady, what's your point? Well, how's that helping us? I said, lady, do you realize that that one person working as a day laborer, you have any idea how many people that they are actually supporting in their nation of origin? And could you imagine how many more people might be pouring across the border if those remittances were going back? And by the way, I'm from Cuba. You know, the communists will promise you the world, right? And so it is, and look at what happened in Venezuela, right? Where they promised them the world. Oh, mira, Venezuela, no, Chavez no sirve. Pero, no, Chavez is no, he's dead now, so it's better for us. But the thing is that to me, part of it, it's like this policy that we have where we wink, wink, let people through. We take advantage of them. Quite frankly, it's a fail-safe for Central and South America, so we don't have socialist and communist governments taking over. We don't want those revolutions. And it's such a complex issue that the bottom line is we need comprehensive immigration reform. Workplace, permits you need to have. And then, by the way, for the activists, okay? In East LA, anybody ever heard of Gil Cedillo? Because I get angry at activists too. Who are the activists here? I get upset at you all too. These folks don't care, a lot of them, about voting. They want to be legitimized. They want to be able to get a driver's license. They want to be able to travel freely with their families. Their children will all be citizens. I'll never forget arguing with Gil Cedillo, Senator Gil Cedillo, who SB 60 in California was trying to get driver's licenses. We started to call him One Bill Gil. He didn't want the scarlet letter. He said, they're going to put the picture on the other side. And I finally told him, Gil, this community doesn't care about what side the picture's on. They want to be able to drive, get insurance, not worry about having their cars impounded. So for the activists, I think that reasonableness needs to be on both sides of the issue. And so as we move forward, let's talk about legitimacy first and foremost, get people out of the darkness, and let's get the comprehensive immigration reform done.
I think in about 10 minutes we're going to be taking some questions here from the audience, so get your questions ready. Before we do that, though, Julian, I want to ask you about EVerify. We talked about EVerify in the film. EVerify is, as I'm sure most of you know, an electronic employment verification tool where you can input somebody's social security number and find out whether or not they're allowed to work here. And of course, we pointed out in the movie that for all of this talk about cracking down on illegal immigration, for some reason they never get to the workplace. They never get to the employers. But we just went through a session where we had SB4, so surely, finally, they did it, right, Julian? They really cracked down on it this time, right? Didn't they crack down on employers?
No. So Texas does have an EVerify law, and it sort of began in fits and starts, I guess one could say, after former Governor Rick Perry in November 2014 issued his executive order, and he said that all state agencies under the purview of the governor's office, which are most of them, and the companies that they contract with, and the subcontractors had to enroll in EVerify. So, and he kind of, he said all current and new employees. Well, a couple weeks later, they figured out, well, you can't go back and check EVerify status for people that you've already hired, so it can only be for future applicants. So they had to kind of figure that out. And people didn't really know how to implement the policy. They said that they were kind of doing it on the honor system. So certainly in 2015, we're going to figure this out, right? We're going to streamline the policy, and we're going to have penalties, and we're going to have, a state agency overseeing things. That didn't happen either. And the gentleman that you interviewed, Senator Charles Schwartner, the Republican from Georgetown, he carried the bill last session in 2015. And what it pretty much did is it codified former Governor Perry's order, which means that state agencies, it expanded it to all state agencies, not just under the purview of the governor. And so it made it into statute. And after the bill is signed, nosy reporters kind of go poking around and be like, okay, so clearly it's the state controller's office, right, that is charged with making sure that everybody's complying. Well, you call the controller, and they said, no, it's not us. Well, the Texas Workforce Commission, well, no, it's not us. So you ask Senator Schwartner, and he says, well, we're pretty sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. So it's pretty much operating on the honor system. Okay, so if you catch somebody that's not, doing it, well, what's the punishment? Well, okay, we'll figure that out in 2017. Lo and behold, Senate Bill 23 by Charles Schwartner, it gets out of the Senate, and you look at the language of the bill, There's still no state agency charged with making sure everybody's complying. And the bill as filed would have found companies in non-compliance that would have prevented them from entering into state contracts for 5 years. But that bill never made it to the House floor either. So we're still operating on the honor system here, which which some Democrats, well, most Democrats, and actually some moderate Republicans were kind of joking, saying, well, we passed SB 4, we have $800 million in border security again, so, be scared and look over your shoulder when you're driving to work because you don't want to get pulled over, but once you're there, we're going to go ahead and continue to pay you these, under-the-table wages. So that's where we are, and really, I mean, you talk to far-right conservatives and even Democrats who reluctantly agree that if you really want to stop the problem, you expand EVerify, make it mandatory to the private sector as well. Because state agencies, if you're here in an unauthorized fashion, are you going to apply for a state agency job? I mean, don't you think that's probably the last place that you would apply for? So I think this just sort of speaks to maybe to the teeth that the business community still has. And just to follow up on what Mr. Merrick said, I think the Texas community on SB4, they showed up, but it was lukewarm compared to previous sessions. And I think you're right. They went all in maybe on the bathroom bill because they saw what happened in North Carolina. And the NCAA wasn't saying, don't pass sanctuary cities or we're not going to come to San Antonio. They were saying, you pass the bathroom bill, we're not going to come to San Antonio. So that's where that went.
Stan, I'd like to hear from you on this issue. Then I have a question for Sarah. After that, then we're going to take questions.
Well, good. EVerify, we've done it for years. It's painless and it works. But you have to realize, let's say Texas, we have 1 million construction workers. Half of them are undocumented. And they're not working as employees. They don't have I-9s filled out like all of my people do. And they're not paying Social Security, unemployment. They don't have workman's comp. They don't get paid overtime. They're independent subcontractors. And there is absolutely no enforcement by the federal government, the state government, or anyone. And there's not going to be. The IRS is responsible for the Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Department of Labor, Wage and Hours is responsible for minimum wage and overtime. And they are trying, I will say DOL is trying to help people get their overtime. So you, Mr. Jose, you're undocumented, you've been working 80 hours a week. Come on, let the government help you get your overtime. He said, So if they don't have the person to go against the employer, so they don't get anything done. So, but you look around, when you drive out today, look at these buildings. Every one of these buildings, I guarantee you, 25 to 30% of the workers are undocumented. And they're working without workman's comp.
Probably higher.
Are higher. And they're told by unscrupulous employers, you can't get workman's comp because if you try to get it, you're going to be deported. So if you get hurt, we're going to take you over here to Memorial Hermann, we're going to drop you off at the ER, and they'll take care of you. And that's exactly what happens. And they don't pay payroll taxes. And what's sad is I've got legal employees whose brother-in-law is undocumented, not paying taxes, working 80 hours a week with no overtime, making a whole lot more money than my guy who's having to pay taxes. And so why does he do that? Well, I'll just go work with my brother-in-law. So we are losing legal workers out of the system. But the tough thing for me is I can't compete. If I'm paying a good wage, all the taxes, that's about 35%, and workman's comp, I'm getting beat 30, 40% on every one of these buildings. And there's no will on the part of the owners who own these buildings to tell the general contractor, make sure everybody on your project is paid by the hour, pays taxes, has workman's comp, overtime, and gets safety training. Texas is the most dangerous state in the nation when it comes to construction. We have more deaths in Texas, and you don't hear about a lot of them. You know why? An undocumented worker gets killed, you know what happens? Go away. There's no lawsuits, nothing. So, and EVerify is not going to work until the workers who are here get legal status. If you passed a state EVerify right now, Julian, you'd have more contractors calling their employees independent subcontractors. So the law has got to change. And you know, if you think about this independent subcontractor thing, look at Uber. Now those guys might really be independent subcontractors, but there's a fight going on now about Uber. There was a fight about Federal Express. So this whole concept of independent contractors This doesn't fly for construction, because if you're a construction worker, you've usually got an employer, and somebody needs to be responsible for your taxes, your training, your safety, and your workman's comp if you get hurt. So the system is terribly broken.
Okay, one question for Sarah, and then we're going to take questions. So, Sarah, I want to ask you about what's going on in Central America and what we, as Americans and as the U.S. government, can do about it. One of the things that I tried to do when I was down there, and we wrote a lot about this. We just had a little tiny piece of it in the movie, but and Henry Cuellar was instrumental in getting money for Central America. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're cutting back now. But do you feel like, Sarah, that it's within our reach to be able to make a real difference in Central America so that they don't feel so desperate to come here? That's what Henry Cuellar told me, congressman from Laredo. If we can create a job for them there, an opportunity for them there, they don't have to come here and make the long journey that often splits their families apart.
I absolutely think so. My principal's here tonight, and she knows that my dream job would be in Central America. I would like to do some of the gang work back there. I think it's interesting. I think the ideal solution would be keeping people there. I don't think the journey is. When people choose to come here, there are so many implications. No matter how bad it is there, the trip up here adds additional trauma, additional hardship. And so what started out as a bad situation that they were leaving behind becomes an even worse situation when they arrive. And then muddling through life here and figuring things out. So I think that it would be wonderful to build up the economy, create a safer environment. Sonia Nazario put out an article a couple months ago about San Pedro Sula. I was in San Pedro Sula last year, right around the time she was, and she was talking about how the murder capital of the world has gotten safer. And she described a lot of the gang work by getting in there and calling it what it was and not being afraid to attack it. Building up support systems, giving other opportunities. My favorite picture she included was a photo of the soccer team that had played soccer team in another neighborhood that had rival gang members, and giving other opportunities, inspiring other options, educating on life outside of the only thing they've known, teaching trades. I think it's opening up the possibilities. I ask kids what they want to do when they grow up here. I ask kids why they came. I don't want to know about their status. I can guess a lot of the time, 99% of the time, unfortunately. But they would rather be back in the home country if their families were there. They often want to know mom, who's come here to send money back. But their first choice, they want to be with mom. They want to be with a sibling. They want to be reunited and have the family unit they didn't have before. But they want a safe place and they want an education. And if we can give them those things back there, I don't think they need to come here. I love my kids, but Hondurans would like to be in Honduras. I'm not seeing a population right now that is wanting to come simply. They want to come to survive. They want to come to reunite, but they don't want to come for the American dream that we've heard about. It's anybody's dream of continuing to survive. So I think that through a lot of different avenues, I don't think just pouring money in. I think that, I don't think writing a check is ever going to cut it. I think that providing skills, providing support, and learning what's acceptable. One of the reasons I continue to make trips back is I'm doing a form of therapy here called EMDR, and they're using it. I chose to study EMDR here because I researched what was being used there. And EMDR is being used with kids who are being returned, as well as veterans and lots of people. But I want to visit the clinics and see how they're using it there. I want to learn how they're approaching it. And I would like to share what I use here with them and take what they're using there and bring it back here. So I think culturally competent, take into consideration the intentions and the needs, but I absolutely think that the United States, Americans, countries in general, all over the world could really support and make a better life in each of these countries so they wouldn't have to come in the first place.
Who has a question? Who has a question?
So add one more thing with that, my soapbox with these kids. The kids I'm seeing are the strongest, bravest individuals, and they have the capacity. You have to figure out the right way to pull that out. But I have no doubt in my mind that they could do incredible things in their home country or be trained here and go back to their home country and use their skills. So they've got the ability, it's just drawing on it.
What's your question, ma'am?
My question is for the chief. It's my understanding that Senate Bill 4 says that cities cannot tell the police department you can't ask about immigration status when they're not being arrested. But what is HPD policy specifically related to Senate Bill 4? You said that Houston has too small a police force and that you can set priorities. If someone does ask status of someone who's not being arrested, do you make them fill out a form in quadruplicate? What do you do to say this is not our priority and to discourage without preventing?
Right, and I think I kind of covered that a little bit earlier. We're going to require officers to actually write a report anytime that they make that ask pursuant to SB 4 at the point of detention. Now, once you're being booked into the jail, I mean, the booking form asks you where you're from and all those other things, but the point of detention, we're going to make them actually write reports. If they have a situation where they're going to call ICE, we're going to require them to contact the supervisor just to make sure that the supervisor is making sure we're not doing something unlawful. Not that they can't do it, but we need to make sure that we kick it up a level. And I'll give you an example. If our officers go in pursuit of a van and they're in a vehicular pursuit at the termination point, 25 people pile out and they start running in all their directions, that's called a clue in my business, and that's probably an indication of somebody's being human trafficking or human smuggling. So when you detain people like that, they're victims, and you do need to make they're detained, you make that type of inquiry. But if you stop a lady for jaywalking, against the red, and she doesn't speak English, start asking, that's a problem. So we're going to actually have some checks and balances. We cannot prohibit them from asking. As a matter of fact, it makes it a crime, and I don't really want to go to jail anytime soon. But we can make it so we make sure that they're only asking under appropriate circumstances and under defensible circumstances, because SB 4 cannot circumvent the Constitution, and we cannot, by law, engage in unconstitutional racial profiling.
Who has another question? Please, whoever, if you have one, please come on down to the mic
And you
now.
look a lot like a young Elizabeth Warren. It's driving me crazy a little bit. You get that all the time, right?
If anyone else wants to ask a question, come down to the mic, please. Sir?
Yeah, so the question to Chief Acevedo, again, Carlos Duarte with Mi Familia Vota. So we've seen that a number of cities have joined in a lawsuit against SB 4. Houston has taken its time, and now we've had Mayor Sylvester Turner saying that he's going to call on council to consider, hopefully taking a vote. You made a statement that I think exemplifies that there's some strategic thinking, right? You're saying, we're being played, not only people on the right, but I think everyone, right? I mean, we're trapped in this foolish game, honestly, right? So I guess the way that I want to ask you the question is this. Has there been any strategic value in having the city of Houston waiting so long? And at this point, we don't even know if Houston is really going to join or not, yeah. Right? We're hoping they will. There still needs to have a vote and whatnot. And then, what is the role that you see for activists that we can actually play into the narrative when Houston being who we are? We should have, from our perspective, we would love to see Houston being at the forefront of this battle. Houston hasn't been there. I'm assuming there's a strategic value somewhere, and to explain this.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, sure. Well, obviously the boss is Mayor Turner. You have to understand, you're dealing with a mayor that understands the legislature, that's been a member of the minority party for a long time and got things done, and is a consensus builder. I think that whatever we do, the greater unity we show in terms of a government, especially as a local government, the fact that he's actually going to have the council weigh in on this issue. But let's just face it, he's allowed this police chief, he is my boss, to be very vocal in social media, in English and Spanish, at the legislature, at press conferences on this issue. He's been very vocal. But you also have to understand that this is one issue out of many issues. We had the pension bill at so I don't want to speak for him because I don't know what his strategy is, but my sense would be you had the legislature with the pension bill going. If we don't get that pension done, we are in deep trouble. So I think our mayor some people want immediate results. He wants the right results, and he wants to make sure that we weigh in, we do it in a manner where we can help without hurting the case, and where we can help without hurting ourselves. So if I had to guess, if we're gonna sue, and this council's gonna sue, if you listen and watch the tea leaves, read the tea leaves, I'm pretty confident that they are actually gonna end up voting to join in the lawsuit. Whether they'll do it separately or do it together, and I don't like the idea of putting all our eggs in one basket. Personally, I'd rather have litigation in more than one court, but I'm not a lawyer, and I'll let the lawyers figure that out. But I think we're headed in the right direction, and quite frankly, we've been pretty vocal as a city, with the mayor and the police chief.
Who has another question? You have a question, sir? Go ahead.
Kevin Appleby with Center for Migration Studies. I hate to burst your bubble, but comprehensive immigration reform is the last thing we should do right now under this Congress and this president. Because what we would get is an enforcement-only bill with maybe half a solution for the dreamers and a merit-based system that eliminates all family visas. That's what we would get if we were lucky, and we'd lose control of the process. So my position, and I think it should be of all organizations.
What's your question, though, sir?
No, I'm just a comment.
Understood.
The second comment is, maybe you should talk to Senator Cornyn, who speaks with forked tongue about this issue, and Mr. McCall, who are currently creating an enforcement bill that will make SB 4 look like a national legislation on steroids. That's my comment.
You have a question, sir? Okay, thank you.
And by the way, I talked to a lot of members of Congress. I'll just leave it at that.
I want to thank all of the panel, and also to welcome Chief to Houston. And I understand we have currently, the mayor has declared Houston to be a welcoming city, which it certainly is. And that there is a series of proposals, some 50 different proposals that have been offered up that are under consideration. Can you speak to any of those that regarding the police and public security? Are you aware of the
on immigration?
No, on the proposals for making Houston a welcoming city?
Yeah, I'm not sure of what 50 proposals. I haven't seen them.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I can just tell you that what I wish that people on both sides of this issue would do is stop using the term sanctuary city. It does not exist. It is a political term that does nothing but evoke emotional reactions from people, and I'll be real honest with you, from the left. I mean, I'm from Travis County. I asked Sally Hernandez, do what you're gonna do, but stop talking about it. Read the tea leaves. You're in Texas. The legislature's coming up, just have your policy, but you don't need to be doing this, because you know what? Real people, real families are now paying the price of politics on both ends of this issue, and we gotta be smart as we debate these issues.
I don't think we're going to quit hearing the end of the term of sanctuary cities. I think it's here to stay, but we have time for one more question. Who's got a question? Go ahead, sir.
I have a general question, and you don't have to answer it. A general question is for y'all, as a person from your own personal point of view, not as your office or title, whatever. But how much do you think corporations play a part in this, influencing, like bringing SB on board and influencing politicians? How much do you think the corporations have played an impact in getting SB 4 to pass?
I think most corporations were diametrically opposed to SB 4. Julian, I'll let you address this issue, but from what I saw, business groups opposed this vociferously and warned of the consequences of it, not only from the perspective of reducing the amount of business that's going to come to Texas in terms of conferences and a black eye and all of that, but also that it would affect the workforce and all of that. But anyway, Julian, you're much more.
Yeah, well, we touched on this earlier, but I think you're right. They did oppose it, but whether or not it was enough, we compared it to what happened 6 years ago, and they mentioned all sorts of things like construction. You can't drive 2 blocks in Austin without seeing a crane somewhere, and I'm sure it's like that here in parts of Houston and things like that, and the demographic change and that everybody's talking about. But again, I think they went. Just one example. When the Senate was debating whether or not to concur with the House amendment, pretty much on the final sort of beefed up legislation, I was on the Senate floor when they said that they were going to vote to do this, and I get an email from the Texas Association of Business, and it said they were going to meet the very next morning to urge the Senate not to concur with the House. And so I sent an email back and I said, is this still happening? Because they're about to do this. And it's almost like I could hear through the email them go, shit, we're too late. And they were, and they dropped the ball, at least on this issue, which, you know, is what a lot of people think. So yeah, they were opposed to it, but did they do enough? I mean, we could sit in here and talk for another 2 or 3 hours.
I can tell you what my sense is what happened, because law enforcement was opposed to it. What happened, from my perspective with the business community and law enforcement, is that when Chairman Guerin in the House removed the real damaging language, and we ended up with a bill that everybody had something they liked, everybody had something they hated, so it meant that's probably good policy if there's something for everybody to like and hate. That's part, so we all collectively breathed a sigh of relief, and I think that happened to the business community. That happened I know it happened with us in law enforcement. And so by the time they came around and they had the Schaefer Amendment, we were caught flat-footed. We didn't think that was going to happen. We thought that the legislature was smarter than we give them credit for, but they proved us wrong.
That was a big mistake.
And
Chief.
so, and that's part one. And then part two is that in 2011, we didn't have a bathroom bill. And I think that the business community spent a lot of political capital fighting on two fronts, right? And so I think it was divide and conquer, and so we got surprised, caught flat-footed, and I think the bathroom bill also was something put a lot of work into.
And I think the moderate Republicans underestimated the power of the Freedom Caucus, or their ability to whip votes or to put pressure on them, because the day before the bill went to the House floor, Chairman Guerin said, I asked Chairman Guerin, I said, Chairman, are you going to leave the amendments to the will of the House? He said, yeah, I might just do that. And he seemed pretty confident, and none of the bad stuff was going to get stuck on. Yeah. And lo and behold, you guys are blindsided.
Right, and that you know, taps into what you were saying earlier, Chief, is that they're worried about their next primary. And even though a lot of the people, a lot of the moderate Republicans didn't want to vote for that, they saw that you know, they were going to be held accountable in a primary, and they didn't want to go there. So I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much to our panelists and to everyone. Thank you for coming. Share the movie on Facebook, spread it out there in the world and the social media. Get it out there for us. Thank you.